The 90s was the decade of cartoony video game mascots. Some of these mascots will go on to be remembered to this day, like Banjo-Kazooie, Spyro the Dragon, Crash Bandicoot, and Sonic the Hedgehog. Others not so much. There is one character who really stood out from the rest, however. You've seen the thumbnail, I'm not going to waste any time building this up. The mascot in question is Earthworm Jim, a character from the mind of Doug Tenapa. The first game would be released in 1994 for the Sega Genesis, later ported to other consoles. The sequel will release the very next year for all consoles, and the third game isn't that great from what I hear, and it kinda killed the franchise. Earthworm Jim wasn't your average platformer that was trying to be hip with the times. They took less influence from Sonic the Hedgehog and more from Looney Tunes. One level you could be traversing kid-friendly hell where you fight lawyers and a snowman. Another you could be bungee jumping with a snot alien. Another one could have you going through a world entirely made of paperwork and files. Another one you could be a blind cave salamander going through a bloodstream cave. Possibilities for levels are pretty much endless. That's not to mention the gorgeous hand-drawn sprites that fit really well in the 16-bit cartridges. When it comes to my opinion on the games, I only fully beat the second one, but despite how challenging they could be, they're still a pretty fun time. Apparently the Earthworm Jim franchise was popular enough to warrant an animated series as a tie-in for the games, releasing in September of 1995. Yet due to lackluster ratings, it was cancelled the very next year, only lasting 2 seasons, with a total of 23 episodes. Back in 2022, after I played a bit of the series for myself, I wanted to see if the cartoon was any good. This is actually one of the few instances where I got a physical copy of something, along with the 2012 Ninja Turtles. This isn't because I don't see the value in physical media. Streaming and digital stuff is just more convenient for me. Anyway, the cartoon was any good. Really good. But you read the title. Earthworm Jim is a very funny, entertaining cartoon, and a nice little expansion of what the game's established. And with the show turning 30 this year, I think now's a good time to delve into this underrated gem of a video game cartoon. So what's the show about? Well, our titular worm hero actually has the exact same origins as he does in the games. One day, the evil Professor Monkeybrain had invented a power suit to be used by Queen Pulsating, Bloated, Festering, Sweaty, Pus-Filled, Malformed Slug for a butt to conquer the universe. As the suit was being delivered to the Queen by Psychro, it accidentally falls to Earth and lands on a worm, giving it sentience. And the rest is pretty much history. The show follows Jim and his sidekick Peter Puppy, and sometimes Princess What's-Her-Name, fighting evil and exploring different surreal worlds. Jim isn't really the brightest hero. Sometimes he'd jump into action without thinking, or fall for bad disguises from villains. With that said, his heart is still in the right place most of the time, and he still has a desire to save the day. Jim is definitely an enjoyable protagonist, topped with a great performance from Dan Castellaneta, though sometimes you can hear a bit of Homer Simpson, mainly when Jim screams or cries. A lot of Jim's gadgets from the games carried over to the show, notably his plasma blaster, his pocket rocket, his mantis shield, even if that was only used twice. There's even some original stuff like the Graze Cycle, and the suit itself having super strength, mainly because the suit is powered by a battery from the Greek gods of this universe. Then there's Peter Puppy, Jim's sidekick slash best friend slash timid straight man. Peter was a character in the games who had 2 dedicated levels each. In the first game it was an escort mission, and the second game you're bouncing his puppies to safety. If you mess up on either level, Peter will turn into a monster and attack you. That was translated into the show. Wherever Peter gets hurt or angry or stressed, he would turn to a monster and attack Jim. Despite this condition, and Peter not being the bravest, he's still willing to go on these crazy escapades with Jim, and would kinda be lost without him. When Peter was an average dog, he was an outcast amongst his peers. But one day he decided to go up against the biggest threat to dog kind. Vacuum cleaners. The vacuum was apparently a portal to heck, where Evil the Cat, more on him later, gave Peter the monster curse, which also made him sentient. In this new condition, Peter was also an outcast. Despite the show being a zany comedy, I couldn't help but feel bad for Peter. He had such a miserable life before meeting Jim. In a few episodes, we see Peter not be able to be Jim's sidekick. One episode is because Jim is fed up with Peter's monster form, and the other one is where Jim turns himself into the police. And Peter gets really depressed about it. Given the context of the origin episodes, this makes a lot of sense. Not a whole much left to say about Peter. He serves his purpose well enough as a straight man to Jim's idiocy. Next, there's Princess What's-Her-Name. In the first 2 games, she was a Tolkien damsel in distress you had to rescue. She's called What's-Her-Name, as saving a girl was a common trope in platformers back then. In the show, while she had some damsel in distress moments here and there, What's-Her-Name was a lot more involved in the adventures, being a lot more strong and badass. There are instances where she runs a rebellion against her sister, Queen Slug for a butt, but they don't really do much with that, unfortunately. In the show's lore, Princess What's-Her-Name was also an outcast, given everyone on Insectica, her own planet, considered her ugly. Queen Slugfurbutt got to have a regular childhood, and eventually take over Insectica, while Princess What's-Her-Name spent most of her childhood training to beat her. Not much left to say about What's-Her-Name, honestly. She's a fairly standard tomboy character, but Kath Soucie does a pretty great job voicing her. The show also has a narrator. He's one of those narrators who's sort of a character himself, sometimes interacting with the other characters, leading to some great bits.
Will they be torn to bits? Will their bones be...
Give it a rest, will ya?
The show also has a few smaller reoccurring side characters and one-offs, making the world feel much more alive. For instance, the show features other superheroes that are not from any of the games, all part of the Galactic Heroes League. But we don't see them do much heroics, and a lot of them have pretty shit powers like turns his eyelids inside out boy who can... Fuck do you think? Then there's the Hamstonator who has big cheeks, and the Space Crickets who are often seen on vacation. When it comes to non-superhero side characters, there's Mrs. Bleveridge, an average cranky neighbor of Jim's voiced by April Winchell, who would get roped in whatever adventure Jim went on, and will later befriend Queen Slugfurbutt. Walter's a character who has a role similar to Larry from Gumball or Rancid Rabbit from CatDog. A character who has a completely different job every time we see them. We first meet Walter in prison when Jim got framed, and Walter uses Jim as dental floss. I like when Jim learns that it was an evil clone doing all the bad stuff, and when he's about to bust out, him and Walter actually leave on good terms. Then there's these two hillbillies who casually comment on whatever villain is attacking Jim's hometown Turlock. There's also Snot, a character from the second game who barely does anything and is only in a few episodes. Like I said, the show also has a bunch of one-off characters, but I'll save some of them for later. For now, let's talk about the show's villains. First, we have Queen Pulsating, Bloated Festering, Sweaty Pus-Filled Mouthworm Slugfurbutt, the final boss of the first game, and ruler of planet Insectica bent on conquering the universe. She's also voiced by Andrea Martin, the same voice actor for Miss Fowl from Jimmy Neutron. Then there's Psychro, a character from the first game who you erase after every level, and the main villain of the second game. Much like the games, he works for Queen Slugfurbutt, but he's often a standalone villain. I mainly love the voice Jim Cummings gives to him, it's so unique from his other roles.
But you know, Prof, the evil dark victories make it all worthwhile.
Evil the Cat is another character from the games, having his own level in each entry. Evil rules the planet Heck, and his episodes will focus on him trying to destroy the universe rather than conquer it. Evil has the most starring episodes alongside Queen Slugfurbutt, so I guess the people behind the show must have really favored him. Evil is also accompanied by his dim-witted yet loyal henchrat. In 2 instances, we see Evil has more henchrats, but the big henchrat is the one we see throughout the show. Professor Monkey for Head is another character from the games, who is a small enemy in level 5, and like I said, is the one who invented Jim's super suit for the Queen. Professor Monkey for a Head is easily my favorite villain in the show. Not only do I love the voice Charlie Adler gave to him, but the banter he has with the monkey on his head is just priceless.
No, it is impossible to find good henchmen these days. Of course, I did not mean you!
Bob the Killer Goldfish might be the weakest adapted villain here. In the first 2 games, he was a boss, 1 level in each. And the whole joke with both fights is that you barely had to do anything, seeing as Bob was just a fish in a bowl. In the show, though, he's much more of a competent threat. I think it was a missed opportunity to lean to the pathetic side from the games, making Bob the show's Toilinator or Amoeba Boys. Last reoccurring villain is Evil Jim, a show-exclusive character. His name is pretty self-explanatory, he's Jim's evil clone. Despite only having 2 main villain appearances, they do some pretty cool things with the fact he's an evil clone. This first thing isn't exactly about Evil Jim himself, but his debut episode, Jim believes that he turns into Evil Jim at night or something. So instead of everyone throughout the episode blaming real Jim for Evil Jim's actions, Jim just turns himself into the police. That's a nice little subversion for these kinds of stories. As for his second episode, he makes a rain gun that'll create an evil clone for anyone it affects, seeing as he feels lonely, as he's seemingly the only evil clone in the universe. And he ends up creating clones of Peter and the princess along with some of the villains near the end of the episode. I love seeing gags surrounding the polar opposite aspects of the clones, like the evil princess being less tomboyish, or evil Peter's monster form being civil and having more straightened fur. It's really cool. The games did have a few other boss characters that didn't make it into the show, like Major Mucus, who was actually in the test pilot, a Flame and Yawn boss, and Rusty the Snowman. It's a shame, it would have been really cool if the show had a larger rogues gallery. Oh well, at least the show's still well written. Much like the games, the episode scenarios and locations can be very absurd and unpredictable, in the best way possible. One episode could have Professor Monkey for Head using evil furniture to take over the world. Another could have Jim go on this massive quest fighting off all his villains, except Evil Jim for some reason, all just to get Mrs. Bleveridge's egg beater back. Another could be a Wizard of Oz parody. Another could have Bob use a de-evolution device to make him stronger. The list goes on. When it comes to comedy, there's surreal gags, but there's also witty dialogue, slapstick, wordplay, fourth wall breaks, and pop culture references. Not every joke lands, some are a bit too random for the sake of it, but there's still way more hits than misses. If I were to bring up another complaint, it's the animation. The art style is fine, I like how shiny everything looks, but the animation isn't the best. Some of the movements don't fit with how hammy the performances can be at times, and there are a few noticeable errors. But lackluster animation isn't enough to ruin a movie or show. Now, this would be the part of the video where I talk about each season individually, but there isn't a whole lot to really say. The big difference season 1 has over 2 is the inclusion of little segments in the episodes. One segment in the beginning of the episode before the intro, and a second one right after the first commercial break. The first segments would involve Jim going up against a villain, who wouldn't play a part in the actual episode, and the second segments would involve another unrelated villain doing some other thing. The opening segments are kinda nothing. They're just Jim in peril against some villain, and he eventually defeats said villain. They do tend to sprinkle in some decent jokes though. The second segments can be much more creative. Like I said, they involve another unrelated villain doing some random thing. Evil the Cat becoming an actor, Bob trying to better control his fish army, Psycho advertising a school for supervillains, and my personal favorite segment, Professor Monkey for a Head telling his monkey a bedtime story. Whilst these segments can be fun, I'm not too upset that they're gone in season 2, as they were probably removed because of time constraints. When it comes to changes in season 2, that's when characters like Walter and Mrs. Bledford started to show up more. The Grim Reaper even became a smaller, reoccurring character. There's also a lot of self-deprecating humor. Like, there's an entire episode acknowledging the show's faulty ratings. So as an effort to boost viewership, Jim makes this interactive system, where this kid decides on whether Jim wins or loses certain fights throughout the episode. It is admittedly a fun concept, and I kinda wish they did a little more with it. Another example is in the Wizard of Oz episode, where throughout the entire thing, the narrator is just completely checked out.
When we left our heroes, oh, forget it, it doesn't really make much sense anyway. I hate parodies. Anyone mind if I skip the transitional speech? Marty, listen, you're my agent. You have to get me off this show now!
Maybe I'm just not researching properly, but I can't really tell if these jokes were done for fun, or if the people behind the show were bitter about it ending soon. Speaking of ending, Earthworm Jim is one of those shows that didn't really have a proper finale. It just kinda ended on a regular Christmas episode where Queen Slugbutt brainwashes Santa. And it's either they didn't care enough to give the show a proper finale, or they just weren't told the show was ending in time to give it one. Before we wrap the video up, I think now's a good time to list some of my favorite episodes. Assault and Battery involves Jim's suit losing power. This is made worse when Queen Slugbutt is about to invade Earth. This is the episode where we get the lore on Jim's suit, how it's so strong because of the battery inside it being from the Greek gods. Not much left to say, except for this episode being full of great gags, like Jim pretending to be in some baseball movie when he's getting the mail, a Johnny Dactyl bit, and one of the Greek gods listening to a walk god. That is objectively the funniest shit ever. Sword of Righteousness involves Jim finding a magical sword in a vending machine sandwich called Fuck Do You Think? And the sword trades Jim to become a proper hero. Meanwhile, Cycro finds a magical orb that could do pretty much anything it thinks up. I just really like the parallels here, where the magical artifact is telling Jim how to be a proper hero, where Cycro is in full control of his magical artifact. By the end, it's revealed that the sword never actually won a proper battle, so Jim takes this as a lesson to just be himself. The Great Secrets of the Universe involves evil summoning this demon to destroy the universe. I mainly like this episode because of the demon himself. He is such a funny character, who's named Rosebud, by the way. Rosebud. I just love how he talks so casually and always gets distracted by side conversations and stories.
Because there are some parts I'd hate to destroy, like, okay, funny story. I was on this tour of Andromeda.
And by the end, Jim tells Rosebud that he doesn't have to take orders from other people. This would lead Rosebud into going on a journey of self-discovery. And he ends up being a waiter because he just likes taking orders. My god, I can't with this show. Opposite Attack is the second Evil Jim episode I mentioned earlier, that involves Evil Jim making evil clones of everyone. Like I said, all the evil clone stuff is really fun and creative. Darwin's Nightmare is another episode I briefly referenced, that involves Bob making this de-evolution device that sucks the evolution out of living beings and gives it to himself. That idea alone is just so creative. Bob ends up using it on Jim and Peter, making them really stupid. So throughout the episode, they're kinda useless. But despite that, they still have some really funny lines.
Pretty smart.
Yeah, and you know what else?
What?
He's pretty smart.
Evil in Love should be pretty self-explanatory. It involves Evil meaning Malice the dog, someone who also wants to destroy the universe. With that, it is love at first sight. This is another episode where the one-off character just makes this episode for me. Not only are Evil and Malice just really cute together, But Malice herself is also a really fun character, where most of the time she'd be speaking in the same villainous mannerisms as Evil, but would sometimes talk casually out of nowhere.
Indeed, my prince of villainy. But where could it be?
Meanwhile, Earthworm Jim and Peter Puppy discover a very unusual hat pin in their attic.
Yeah, that was easy.
Lastly, there's Hyper Psychro, the episode where Psychro drinks a special coffee and gains superpowers from it. This episode is home to another great one-off character, with this world's first ever superhero. With him being old, he's constantly bitching about the younger superheroes, which is pretty funny.
Always with the coffee. I invented explosions. I invented nervous. I invented energy.
And the episode's ending gets so bizarre that I don't really want to spoil it here. You should just watch the episode for yourself to find out what happens. And those were my favorite episodes. 3 years after the show ended, Earthworm Jim 3 would release, and like I said, it ultimately killed the franchise. Aside from a canceled PS2 entry, a few ports, and a shitty HD remaster of the first game, not much really came out of the Earthworm Jim franchise after that. A few years back, an Earthworm Jim 4 was announced, along with a new 3D animated series Beyond the Groovy. But those are kinda stuck in development hell, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they were flat out canceled at this point. It really does suck this franchise just kinda faded into irrelevancy. Like, say what you will about the current states of Rayman, or Banjo-Kazooie, or Spyro, but at least people these days still know who they are and talk about them frequently. The same cannot be said for Earthworm Jim. Much like the games it's based on, the show was never striving to win any awards or chase trends. The show knew what it wanted to be and embraced it. Not only is it really funny and creative, but also stays pretty faithful to the games, maintaining the exact same tone and aspects of those games, while also adding a bunch of new things for it to stand on its own. I really can't recommend the show enough. I got my copy of the full series on Amazon for about $15, but I'm sure you can find a DVD elsewhere. If we don't get any new Earthworm Jim content anytime soon, not only do we have the first 2 games to revisit, but we also have one groovy animated series. Okay, bye.